Occult Confessions is brought to you commercial-free through the generous support of our patrons. Visit occultconfessions.com and click on Donate to help keep the history of the occult on the digital airwaves. Today's episode features a conversation with the leader of a contemporary Gnostic church, Neo-Gnostics. While this interview does help to reveal some of the politics, practicalities, and exoteric beliefs of modern Gnosticism, I wanted to take a moment before we got into that conversation to outline the origins of Gnostic thought in contemporary occultism to put contemporary Gnosticism in context. I am your host of The Alchemical Actors and this podcast, Occult Confessions. My name is Dr. Rob C. Thompson. Modern Gnosticism, or Gnosticism in modern occultism, or Neo-Gnosticism, it goes all the way back to the 18th century, when the Bruce and Askew codices were recovered. For the scholar April D. DeConnick, it is the recovery of lost Gnostic texts that leads to revivals in interest in Gnosticism. The Askew Codex, A-S-K-E-W, was originally acquired by a doctor and book collector. His name was Anthony Askew, and then sold to the British Museum in 1785. The Askew Codex contains the Pistis Sophia, which was a text relating what Jesus taught after his resurrection, and was the fullest direct articulation of Gnostic thought for scholars to study through the next century and a half. What I mean by Jesus after his resurrection is that some Gnostics believed that Jesus remained on earth for 11 years after his death, and after his resurrection, that is to say, conveying secret teachings to his disciples during that time period, secret teachings that did not jive necessarily with the teachings of the Orthodox or Catholic Church. These teachings formed the core of the Gnostic lessons in the Pistis Sophia. The Bruce Codex was purchased by the Scottish travel writer James Bruce, both codices named for the purchaser, really. And this was while he was their white Western purchaser, I guess I should specify, because James Bruce, the Scottish writer, was in Egypt when he purchased this book. It contains the Book of Jew, J-E-U, and a book called The Untitled Apocalypse. These texts, these codices, informed 19th century writers' views on Gnosticism. Perhaps most importantly, a guy called C.W. King. King's The Gnostics and Their Remains, first published in the 1860s, was Helena Blavatsky's main source of information about Gnostic thought. So let's talk a little bit about King, because as soon as Blavatsky picks him up, he becomes a major source for modern occultism. Anything Blavatsky picks up becomes a major source for modern occultism, although probably you haven't heard of King before. So C.W. King contends that he is the only writer in English to attempt to cover the topic of Gnosticism, apart from a guy called Dr. Walsh, who wrote an essay on coins, metals, and gems as illustrating the progress of Christianity in the early ages. Now, naturally, an essay on coins, metals, and gems is hardly a Gnostic-focused work. Walsh, in King's terms, largely dismissed the Gnostics as heretics, and this is the error that C.W. King attempts to remedy in his work, his Gnostics and Their Remains. Not so much in terms of arguing for Gnostics' orthodoxy as for the value and meaning of the Gnostics' religious system. King is trying to say the Gnostics are important and worthy of study unto themselves. The relatively recent discovery of the Pistis Sophia relative to King's publication of the Gnostics and Their Remains gives King the opportunity to examine Gnosticism from a first-hand perspective, as opposed to reading between the lines of its detractors, which, as we mentioned in our history episode on Gnosticism, was frequently was how a lot of our understanding of Gnosticism came forward. King, in a line of thought that would clearly appeal to Blavatsky, identifies Eastern religion as a powerful influence on Gnosticism. King says that the seeds of the gnosis were originally of Indian growth, carried so far westward by the influence of that Buddhistic movement, which had previously overspread all the East from Tibet to Ceylon, was the greatest truth faintly discerned by Jacques Matter, but which became evident to me upon acquiring even a slight acquaintance with the chief doctrines of Indian theosophy. King, after his predecessors writing in other languages like Jacques Matter, also discovered hints of Zoroastrianism, Egyptian occultism, and astrology in Gnostic thought. So just to clarify, I said that King was the first, or one of the first. He identifies himself as the first to do a serious study of Gnosticism in English, but there were other scholars in German, French, who were exploring Gnosticism. But it wasn't a topic that was being widely explored in 1860 or by 1860. Blavatsky then became one of the first major occultists to popularize Gnostic ideas, drawing on King, particularly her Gnostic take on the story of Adam and Eve. Blavatsky viewed the Gnostics as consonant with the theories and ideas of her beloved Hindus. She argued that the Pistis Sophia belonged to a Brahmanic tradition. Blavatsky said, "His gnosis was that of exoteric and ritualistic dogma, of dead-letter orthodoxy, while the wisdom which Jesus, an initiate of the higher mysteries, would reveal to them, the Gnostics, was of a higher character, for it was the fire wisdom of the true gnosis, or the real spiritual enlightenment. One was fire, the other smoke." So in what she means there is that Gnosticism was fire and orthodoxy was smoke. In the Upanishads, Blavatsky contends, the word fire means in these allegories both the self and the higher divine knowledge. So for more on this, I do recommend you go check out particularly my episodes on Blavatsky and the Secret Doctrine, which I believe is Season 5. So, if you haven't listened to Season 5, go ahead and have a listen back. Having heard our stuff on Gnosticism now, our history of Gnosticism, and even some of what I'm talking about now and what we'll discuss in this episode and our interview with Lynn Short, you can go back and see how Blavatsky informed Neo-Gnosticism, or how ancient Gnosticism, through King, informed Blavatsky. Anyway, at the time Blavatsky was finishing her Secret Doctrine, the Pistis Sophia had only been translated into Latin. It was Blavatsky's own personal secretary, the scholar and sometime theosophist G.R.S. Mead, who would translate the document into English. Mead served as the general secretary of the Theosophical Society. He actually gave the eulogy at Blavatsky's cremation and was the editor of the Lucifer, also the Vahana, and the first editor of the Theosophical Review. Because, after Blavatsky's death, along with Annie Besant, it was Mead who transformed the Lucifer into the Theosophical Review, a revamped version that Mead himself, as I'm saying, was responsible for changing. Mead left Theosophy in 1909, just since we've covered so much of the history of Theosophy, over the controversy created around Annie Besant's choice to reinstate Charles Leadbetter to the Society. That's a story we told specifically in our Leadbetter episode. But just to give a brief overview, Leadbetter had been accused of encouraging masturbation and engaging in inappropriate behavior with young male theosophists. As I said in that episode, the open secret of Leadbetter's sexuality made these accusations somewhat suspect, but insofar as Mead suspected the Society was promoting child abuse by allowing Leadbetter back in, Mead was certainly within his rights for leaving, so I guess there's good arguments on both sides, and it speaks to his moral character. Ultimately, what I say on the Leadbetter episode to clarify is that we just don't know what happened in the privacy of Leadbetter's engagements with these young men. We do know that he promoted masturbation, which certainly is not, at least in the estimation, the morality of this particular podcast, a bad thing. But whether or not there was inappropriate behavior with the children, the young boys, we can't say. But in Mead's case, Mead concluded that yes, or at least the possibility was enough for him to say that Leadbetter should not be readmitted. And so when he was, G.R.S. Mead quit the Theosophical Society, along with many others. It splintered the organization. Mead was a fairly prolific author and completed his translation of the Pistis Sophia in 1896. His book before that was actually on Simon Magus. So Mead spent quite a bit of time researching and writing about Gnosticism. Through his relationship with Blavatsky, I guess it's conceivable that some of Mead's scholarship informed Blavatsky, but Mead was publishing largely after her death and after her completion of Secret Doctrine. However, this is not to suggest that Mead didn't have a significant influence on the development of occultism. Although he didn't directly inform Blavatsky's writing, he did, by the way, edit Secret Doctrine, but he didn't inform her writing. otherwise with his Gnosticism or his Gnostic scholarship, but his Gnostic scholarship did directly inspire Carl Jung and his theories on Gnosticism. Going back to the modern scholar de Koninck, she suggests that Blavatsky and Jung were perhaps the two most significant popularizers of Gnostic thought before the New Age. Blavatsky and Jung made Gnosticism a significant topic of occult thought, leading up to the blossoming of new religious movements beginning in the 1960s. The Nag Hammadi texts also contributed significantly to the role Gnosticism played in this moment in religious history. Jung wrote to Freud in 1912 about his interest in Gnosticism. Jung believed that the Gnostics' inner exploration was a form of proto-psychoanalysis and argued that they presaged a transpersonal form of psychology. Patrick Marsolek argues that Jung's interest in alchemy stems from the shortage of Gnostic texts available before the discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts. The Jung Institute was actually responsible for an early translation of the Nag Hammadi texts in 1955, just a few of the texts, not the whole thing. Before this, Jung made reference to Mead's work, G.R.S. Mead, the Pistis Sophia, and explored the subject of alchemy as a kind of adjunct to Gnosticism in the absence of more texts to explore. He wrote his cryptic Seven Sermons of the Dead using the pseudonyms Philemon or Simon Magus and Basilides, prominent Gnostics. So he used the names of Gnostics in his Seven Sermons of the Dead. He actually only published his 7 sermons privately and distributed copies personally to friends and family. It wasn't made public until after his death in 1962 as an appendix to his popular memoir. The 7 sermons were a kind of revelation stemming from Jung's exploration of his own unconscious, which was collected most famously in the Red Book, but the Red Book was kept unpublished in any form until after his death. Maybe at some point this podcast will get around to exploring Jung's occultism. I think it's certainly worth a deep dive unto itself. Anyway, Blavatsky and Mead laid the groundwork for Jung, whose most occult and esoteric work arrived just before the dawning of the Age of Aquarius and the translation of the latest Gnostic text discovered in Egypt. Going back to our interview with ex-WEOR member Lynn Short, modern Gnostic churches often make reference to Blavatsky because they owe their theology, at least in part, to her. As you'll hear in today's conversation, Aleister Crowley also has an influence. The inversions of Gnosticism, which turned Orthodox Christian mythology on its head, had a natural appeal for Crowley the Beast, and he wrote a Gnostic Mass conceived for a Gnostic Catholic Church. He frequently used the word Gnostic as a kind of brand for his particular Thelemic theology. Anyhow, I just wanted to set the stage in this way for our conversation with the Neo-Gnostic Church today, which, without further ado, I will go ahead and let you get on into. Please enjoy.
We, the members of the Secret Order of Alchemical Actors, do solemnly commit ourselves to a full and honest telling of the history of the occult as far as we know it.
My name is Dr. Rob C. Thompson, here with another interview special today. Our Producia Discordia, Luke Kinnaman, is right here with me. Luke, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. You know, I'm here. It's a happy day, and I've got an angry toddler.
Well, that's just a regular day, man.
Exactly.
Toddlers come in many shades and moods. So, Luke, what are we talking today? We're talking Gnosticism again, but a different flavor of Gnosticism, yeah?
We are, and we have 2 unique guests who are going to be delving into those different flavors of Gnosticism with us. First, we have Paul Joseph Rovelli, the founding director of the Gnostic Church of LVX, or Light, with over 25 self-published books on Amazon, many found online for free as well. He boasts the first and only fully owned modern Gnostic church on the continents of the Americas. The church is overseen by the spiritual lineage that he heralds for the AA. For context, that is the Astron Argon, or the Order of the Silver Star. And with its magical lodge, the AOM, the Archidoxal Order of Magi. It is fully dedicated to the goddess, referred to by the ancient Gnostics as the thought of God. Paul, hello.
Hi there, how are you?
Doing fantastic.
Cool.
Joining Paul today, we have Joseph D. Oliveira, student of psychology, religion, and the occult, as well as the social media coordinator for the Gnostic Church that Paul is running.
Hello.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Paul, could you give us a quick primer on what it is that you preach?
We brag about a modern Gnosticism. And, you could say we rely on everything from Ralph Waldo Emerson to Carl Gustav Jung for influences. And then, of course, the whole concept of Thelema, the Preternatural, and holy books. And we weave in a variety of things if you want to look at the clerical side of the issue. But individually, for our congregants, it's easier to say that we are facilitating genius in each other. So it really comes down to, what is genius? And we can go through all of that if you like.
Yeah, let's get a few variants of genius.
I came across something that was profound, and they were talking about genius in a very natural way. And an older woman, was complaining because all she did was raise her family. And somebody pointed out to her that that is her genius. It doesn't matter that she was in some religion that she now felt, was inadequate in one way or another. She comes to this gnosis and, wow, it's too late for me to do all these Gnostic practices and this and that. And say, but wait a minute, part of it is about rumination and going back over your life and see what it is, what talent motivates you, and what seizes your imagination. As Campbell said, follow your bliss, do what thou wilt, find the true inner self of who you are. And that's where you're going to find your genius. And you have to do that no matter what the outer world really tells you should be doing. There's other conditions on that. We can take a whole sidebar into other conditions. But really, very simply, if you come into our church, we want to celebrate whatever it is that you have and that you do and what you're making of your life. And you come once a month to our service, whether you attend online or in person, and you kind of get to recharge spiritual batteries after, the world has beat you up for the last month.
So services are monthly. What's that look like? What will the experience?
We do something called the Rosicrucian Mass. And the Rosicrucian Mass includes several key elements. There's a call and answer with the congregation. We affirm certain virtues. We have the doctrine of the four yods, which are four other sets of virtues, which, shall we say, transcendentalists, scientific information, just in Kant's idea of the transcendentalist thought, working towards some kind of idealism. And these are generally quotes from Blavatsky mixed in with some stuff from Castaneda and ideas on intent and integrity, that kind of thing. So there's a sort of a virtue teaching, but without really, adopting a code. We don't really have any code of ethics, virtuous response, good and bad deeds, whatever. You evaluate that for yourself. That's Gnosticism.
So tell me a little bit more about the doctrine then. So you've got some Blavatsky in there. How does the doctrine come together? Is that something you're working on, Paul? Does it come from other sources?
Doctrine, while I can claim a whole variety of sources, this really is also in part my reading of both ancient and modern Gnosticism. At its core, it does not teach, an ethical, moral paradigm. I often say that when spirit leaves the temple, morality rushes in to fill the void. We're not a religion in any other sense than we are just a way of living and getting to know oneself. Because the key of Gnosticism, ancient and modern, is know thyself.
So what is that process for a person who joins your organization?
You would start, if you took our Preparing for Gnosis course, you would start with ruminations and diary keeping. Going through your psychic issues, again, somebody coming to any conversion is coming for certain reasons. And in the case of Gnosis, they're finding something not valuable with traditional religion. But for us, we see also they still want to go to a church on Sunday. Communities still involve themselves with churches.
And who is drawn to your church?
So I think going back to what Paul was saying earlier about how the church and the congregation itself is meant to celebrate genius, our own genius and each other's genius, including the supermom, right? A supermom is worthy of admiration and respect. A woman who dedicated her life to her children and her family, that is her genius, right? That's what Paul was saying. We would hope that she and her family would be drawn to our church just as much as intellectual scholars like yourself would be drawn to come and have dialogue like this with Paul and I.
It is an open door, and you're welcoming anyone who wants to study or anyone who wants to practice.
I think right now we have a habit of attracting the intelligentsia due to our content, due to the nature of the conversation we're trying to have. It does at the moment draw a more cerebral archetype of people.
Let's turn that over sideways just a little bit. You're a 30-something matriarch or patriarch in a family. You've got your 2.3 kids, and you want to give them spiritual instruction. So you go to your old, little Christian denomination that you were, baptized in or what have you, and you come out feeling dirty. When you bowled your girlfriend at 16 in your dad's car, that's it. You were forbidden heaven already. You've, committed one of the cardinal sins.
Right. And then the child that came from that union, well, that child is filthy and it needs to be washed clean. And conveniently, we know the process by which to wash your child clean. Like, it's gross. The whole thing is gross.
Well, more than gross, you come out feeling filthy, and you don't want to put your kids through this kind of spiritual torture. You went through it as a kid yourself. You want better for your family. So, we want to offer a place of sanctuary. The idea coming that you come for a Eucharist, we give you a knowledge lecture. That's what we call the sermon. You have this Eucharist of the 5 elements, which is just connecting with body, soul, spirit, air, earth, that kind of thing. And then we have this little call and response thing where you get to participate, and then you're read some other virtuous ideas.
So what is a virtue? What's held up that? I mean, I hear the moral, the gray area, right? There's a lot of gray area to travel in, but what is the ideal?
Okay, well, in one case, on one of
some Emerson quotes.
Yeah, well, in one case, part of the doctrine of the 4 yods, where we talk about, integrity. If you look at all the little tiny sins, I can slip that candy bar in my pocket at the store while I'm getting my morning coffee. They'll never know, And you start doing all those little things, eventually they weigh on you. In the same way, if you stop doing all those little niceties, hold that door open and help the old lady cross the street. These little things add up too and create virtue in your character. They build integrity. And so it's more of a practical instruction. How you view that is up to you in your experience. I don't know what it's like to walk in your shoes.
So gnosis is in part about knowing or coming to understand your own moral system. It sounds like a bit of thelema, right, does sneak in, right? This is, do what thou wilt, you say. Like a Crowleyite ethic at its best is that you study yourself, know your own will, and then do that will.
Yeah.
Not just do whatever you feel.
That will is Schopenhauer's will. That will belongs to Nietzsche and to Sartre. It is a well-examined concept.
Yeah, I don't think it's solely the realm of Crowley. Yeah, Crowley definitely, I think, is a herald of that. And to say that Crowley is not cited or studied by people in our church would be a lie. Like, of course he is, but he's not the only one that talked about that.
He's certainly a messier one, right, than others.
Yeah, yes, that's true.
For Crowley, we really use the holy books. And the holy books are creating a new mythology in the same way Carl Jung's Red Book is creating a new mythology. In the same way Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine creates new mythology, new gnosis. And that's the crowning achievement of the knight monk of the Gnostic Church, the member of the Astron Argon.
Let me pose a challenge to you guys. Let's imagine a scenario where a person comes into the church and, contrary to your ethic, they don't have genius. They come to you, they say, I've thrown away my life, I've been an alcoholic, or, I joined the conservative Christian church and I spent my whole life on this and I've just realized that this has been a waste of my time. I've seen the light and yet every moment up till now has been a complete waste. What do we do with this person?
We could I personally might recommend some therapy. I mean, I would tell anybody going into spiritual studies, to do at least 6 months with a psychotherapist, because you have to be nuts.
Yeah, the outcasts, the misfits are a big part of the group that finds us, especially online. Diagnosable mentally ill people also frequently find us. We get, schizophrenics or people of all walks of life, people who claim to be vampires show up at our. It's very interesting.
So, is the word gnosis? I mean, is that what's? I mean, Joe, you're talking about this interesting collection of people who gather. Is the word gnosis itself, you think, what's causing this in part?
I think it certainly could be. I've had this conjecture with Paul, just in conversation and chatting about church business, about how certain symbols that are used, certain words that are used are tied to a certain era of Western mystery tradition mythology, right? And I think more kind of back to Paul's point there, it's part of why developing new mythology is important. Because when you're developing new gnosis, you're coming up with these new ideas and new ways to express them. When people show up regurgitating nonsense to you, or the ones who show up claiming to have magical powers or to speak to the dead or to aliens, you've got all sorts of interesting characters claiming to do all sorts of interesting things. And while, again, we greet everyone at the door with love, and we do our best to pen that in, we will say, hey, have you considered psychotherapy? That is a suggestion. We will make an earnest effort to help people improve themselves. And once people realize that we're not just here to buy into whatever delusion that they're propagating that day because we use the word gnosis, they show themselves the door very quickly. They don't show up at the monthly service.
My suggestion is more that if someone if they're not happy with what they've done with their life, if they can't pin down, something like motherhood and say, this is what I've spent my time doing, something worthwhile, if they feel that they've wasted their life, then how do we start them at square one?
Oh, that's it's a great question. It's such a big question, and there's so many approaches to it. I don't know that the local or a local community church is the answer. I think, it's what's the most important step a man can take. I think the answer is the next one. If you feel you've wasted every step until now, what is the next step? What's the most important one?
So self-reflection in order to move forward.
I mean, there's no other true way to move forward. If you don't choose it for yourself, if you let someone else pick that path for you.
So let's pivot a little bit. Let's kind of take a look at how your community engagement has been. Something that, Joe, you and I had discussed a little bit prior to delving into this conversation is how the community has been reacting to you, both in positive ways and in some more negative ways.
We're located in Hoosick Falls, New York, actually North Hoosick, but Hoosick Falls is our mailing address. Just about 6, 7 miles outside of Bennington, Vermont, in the far end of the Capital District of New York State. I really came into this blind, made some significant mistakes in that regard. Though I did nothing wrong, people around me were willing to do wrong. We've developed a false, bad reputation. Its own yellow press has been moving through the area. And pretty much started because I got to tell you, the We Are group that operates in town has the ear of the town authority. They're placed in the public town hall for their meetings, and they're considered legit. So their complaints against us, got our building attacked.
So there's multiple Gnostic churches in this one small town. Why do you think that is? Why is there so much Gnosticism in this small town?
Certainly there seems to be some, unconscious collective force moving in the area that we're hoping to seize upon with the talisman that is our church building.
So but now we have conflict between the Gnostic organizations in the town. Tell us more about that.
Even though Weor himself, he plagiarized just about everything and then put his own twist over it. But I've got all of his electronic documents, and they're numerous. But he splintered off into two separate groups, somebody after his death. And, these two separate groups, I don't know which one operates in this area, whether that's two different groups or they're connected to the same old group. But there seems to be some connectivity because I used to attend the one in Saratoga. I used to attend their lectures. And I had just moved here. I'm looking to make some, spiritual contacts, people with interests similar to mine. And I attend these lectures, and man, they twisted Gurdjieff with Beethoven, with every other major spiritual player you can mix, and they didn't talk about others that they mixed in. And it got to be that I started to see how sick these people are. And when I started reading up on them, I started learning about their issues with orgasm, tying that to hell, so that you're condemned in punishment. And it's like, this is just an extreme form of Christianity. So it's no matter that they would fit in when everybody knows everybody in this town. This is where my wife grew up, and now her mother lives over at this house, and her uncle lives over here, and my brother-in-law bought this farm over here. And I'm talking to the bus drivers. Now, my wife is now working at the restaurant 10 years into being here, right around the corner from us, and they're owned by some of the people that, came at us. And our reputation is getting cleaned up, but we've still suffered the economic loss.
So what kind of things did they have to say about you?
Oh, we do these services where the woman sits on the altar bleeding. The red exit lights above our doors that shine at night, well, because they're red, that's the pit of hell being open. My wife and I will joke, we'll come home in the wintertime and we'll go, oh, come on, let's go in the church and rub our hands over the pit of hell.
Oh, so real satanic panic stuff then.
Oh yeah, there was public accusations of Satanism.
Yeah, they came on our Facebook group. You're dragging people straight to hell in a handbasket.
It's interesting because you see, especially when we think about small town America, we might see more intense Catholic groups or different, branches of Christianity kind of driving forth this narrative, but not usually something, even though Weor's definition of Gnosticism is vastly different than yours. It's wild to see how much hate you have been receiving.
Well, isn't the freedom without the proper moral structure to raise our kids in Jesus, isn't that fearful? I teach in this town too. I'm a substitute school teacher. Right? When my business failed, I had to do something quick. And I'm driving home the other day through town, and there's this car in front of me, and it has this fractional equation, and above it says faith, and below it said fear. So a churchgoer here, and probably in that fundamentalist church that's about 200 yards from us. And, I started to realize, faith is built on fear. Your fear of death is going to drive you in common society to seek a security blanket. And the security blanket is Jesus. You're going to go to heaven when you die. Just be good. And, notice at every funeral, everybody's going to heaven.
And this is something we've talked about before on the show when we did our Christianity panel. There is a lot of, if you do not live the exact in the image of God, and you're not obeying these tenets of Christianity, you're going to hell. And you are taught that as a Christian from such an early age.
Well, realize too, and this can start with something as simple as a little bit of intelligence, but what you're sacrificing for that security is sovereignty over your own thinking. You've been scared and conditioned into these thoughts to step out into the world of freedom where nothing is solid.
I want to hear a bit more about Emerson. Connect for me Gnosticism and Emerson.
Emerson was all about the self. He walked out of his English Orthodox religion. He walked out of his Anglican raising, and he couldn't buy Jesus anymore. And he was a pastor there. And he started looking for personal self, personal integrity. He started looking for very specific ideas that are Gnostic. And even him and Nietzsche were both well enamored of each other. They knew of each other. And their philosophies were very similar, but expressed in a different way. And his transcendentalism was American. He was trying to create an American idea that wasn't that old European religion. Here we are, this new country. Here's a chance to seize the day and create a mythos that belongs to us, that's American, us on this continent, no matter where we came from.
Now, on the same subject of I guess, doctrine and inspiration, take us back to the old Gnostics. How is the original Gnostic church, circa 100, 200, 300, inspiring what you guys are doing?
Well, now, the old Gnostics, there are some things we have in common. This idea about morality. The old Gnostics didn't give you this moral teaching. But after that, you have to divide them all up into sects. And some of them were, going after Greek philosophy, while others were really Jewish, others were Judeo-Greco. Still others were Roman in their own way. And we can even tie in Josephus, into this whole creation of the New Testament that might be going out on a little bit of a limb, but there's certainly something there. So you have all these different Gnostic sects, and they all had different metaphysical perceptions of the universe. So I hate today when I hear people say, well, the ancient Gnostics did, and it's all about the demiurge, and blah, blah, blah. And no, it's not. The Sethians, flirted with Jesus for a little while and then went back to Seth. The places that the different sects came from. The Valentinians had messengers of light delivering you the history of heaven. And they relied really on the way they tie into the Greek system is not directly through Greek philosophy, but they had the metaphysical view of the sky, which came into later Hermeticism. The sky was a canopy. And there was something beyond that. The 12 constellations are just merely a canopy. That's a wall. And there's something beyond that. That's the pleroma, the fullness. Okay, whereas we're saying today the fullness is you, the fullness of your own self-pursuit of your own life.
Where can we find you guys?
We have the TikTok, we have the Instagram, we have the Reddit, of course. We have YouTube. Our YouTube channel has a whole variety of programs.
We've recently condensed all of the things that he is referring to into a link tree that is readily available on all of the regular social media tabs that you can find.
So what's our search terms when we go to these Instagram or YouTube or TikTok?
Oh, Gnostic Church of LVX.
There you go.
Well, Paul, Joe, we want to thank you guys for this fantastic conversation.
Much appreciated, guys. Thank you for taking the time here on Occult Confessions.